Welcome to I'm Not Joking, the podcast where a behavioral scientist examines what it's like to live a humorous life. Glimpse into the lives of the funniest people in entertainment, business, and science as your host, Dr. Peter McGraw, explores their habits, motivations, and secrets to success. Get ready to fire up your brain and your funny bone. Now, here's your host.
Welcome to I'm Not Joking, the podcast that looks at the lives of funny people. I'm Peter McGraw. Today's guest is Mark Sanborn. Mark is the president of Sanborn and Associates. As a professional speaker, he has given over 2,600 presentations and is the author of 8 books. His book, The Fred Factor, How Passion in Your Work and Life Can Turn the Ordinary into the Extraordinary, is an international bestseller, appearing on the New York Times, Business Week, and Wall Street Journal bestseller lists. Mark is a member of the Speaker Hall of Fame and is a past president of the National Speakers Association. Welcome, Mark.
Thanks, Peter.
So you're one of a few non-comedic people who have qualified for this.
I think most people would agree with that.
So I want to know, if you weren't working as an author or professional speaker, as a consultant, what would you be doing with your life?
Well, I kid around and say probably drive an Uber because that's a pretty low cost of entry career. And actually, I enjoy talking to Uber drivers, so I think being a driver just for grins actually is kind of a fun idea. I don't know that it's as profitable as I would like it to be, but that's a good question. I became a speaker because when I was young, I entered a speech contest and was so bad, so abysmal, that it challenged me to figure out the craft of speaking. And I often thought that if I had done okay, if I'd have just been all right, I would have said, tried that, got the t-shirt and gone on to, be an engineer or a lawyer or who knows what. But I would be in the communication arts. I just think that the idea of educating, teaching, learning, that sphere of both being the provider and the recipient is where I would still be, even if I wasn't speaking per se or writing books.
So some form of educator, performer.
Yeah,
could you be in a band?
I'd love to be in a band if I could play an instrument.
You have a guitar here.
I could be in a really bad band. Actually, and the truth is I was in a lot of really bad bands early on in my life. That's how I decided not to pursue music, is by being in bad bands. But I think performance has melded into, when I say performance, not just performing your job, but all your job work is a performance of such sorts. It's just the way our culture has gone. My friend Scott McCain wrote a book called All Business is Show Business, and he wrote the book some years ago, but he's right. Show business and regular business have intertwined or morphed into one kind of big body of work. And when we do business, we look at the experience we have, just as when you go to a concert. If the concert's 2 hours late, it takes away from the fact it was a good band. If it's a hassle to wait in line and get through the doors, it takes away from the fact that the concert started on time. So I think business increasingly has to look at the performing arts, whether it's music or comedy or whatever, and integrate that into how they interact with customers.
Yeah, so we've talked about, I want to get back to the Uber thing, but you had talked to me at one point, we were talking about professional speaking, and you talked about Big E and Little E.
Yeah. When I was president of the National Speakers Association, I had my theme for the year be expertise to the power of eloquence. And it's funny because originally I thought it'd be clever to say E squared, except if you know anything about math, a square is times itself. So E squared would have been expertise to the power of expertise. So I used 2 different kinds of E's. I used like a block E and a script E to show that what I was saying is if you have expertise with no eloquence, you'll be about as successful as if you have eloquence with no expertise. Mm-hmm. People want both. Sometimes if you think to the dry pastor or the dry professor or the boring teacher you had, you realize they had a lot of expertise, but their inability to be eloquent in the delivery of it and to engage you prevented you from enjoying or learning much. And then the other side of the coin is that person who's a great communicator and they're they've got the chops, but they don't say anything. When it's all over, you haven't, there's no there. You haven't learned anything. So I think the two are important. Now, in comedic arts, I think that people aren't looking for content per se, but they are looking for, that might be F to the power of E. They're looking for funny delivered in maybe not a way that is eloquent, but a way that is entertaining and engaging. I mean, it's funny. You think about Stephen Wright, who's still one of my favorite comics of all time. Who'd have thought you could take a really simple joke and deliver it absolutely dry deadpan and make it hilarious? Mm-hmm. And so I would suggest that when I say eloquence, he has a form of eloquence. Maybe it would be F to the power of A, funny to the power of artistry.
I see. Yeah, I use this term. I don't use your language, but I use that sentiment in my MBA class. I talk about sizzle and steak. Yeah. And so my students do a marketing pitch at the end of the semester, and they're graded largely on the steak, right, on the content, on the quality of the ideas. But they get a bonus if they sizzle. And the idea is that you need to sell ideas in business. I have a board of evaluators come in. They're giving their time. They should have an enjoyable time. Again, all things equal, right? You can't make up for the lack of steak, but it can help.
That reminds me a long time ago, and since I'm old enough that some of my illustrations aren't shared by others, I'll just say there was a political candidate, and I'm talking a long time ago, and he was a really solid human being, decorated war veteran, accomplished leader, but one of the commentators said he, actually I believe it was Dennis Miller, who said of Stockdale, if you remember that, he had made the cardinal mistake of being boring on TV. And that points to the fact that regrettably, often people buy sizzle and find out later there's much steak. And that, especially in business, that you'll be found out in startups. There are a lot of sexy startups that a year or two later are all the money's gone because they were big on sizzle, but they lack the substance of the steak, if you will.
Yeah, indeed. Back to the Uber thing for a second. Suppose you retire. Would you drive an Uber just to keep busy? I
wouldn't drive it to keep busy. There's a lot of things that would keep me busy, but I would drive it just to meet some interesting people and mix things up. Mm-hmm. I don't view retirement like most people do. To me, retirement is not retiring to do nothing, but just retiring to do something different. Yeah. So I just think it's fascinating. I've always talked to cab drivers and limo drivers and transportation people because I've traveled for 40 years, and I find they have fascinating stories. Often you have to kind of pull it out of them. They don't always volunteer it. But there's something about Uber. I think that a taxi driver and a passenger or a fare are further apart than an Uber driver and an Uber rider. I haven't really thought about it that deeply, but I think that culturally we realize we're kind of each other, right? I'm in his car, her car. We're talking about our kids. A taxi driver, there's that little bit of that perceptual space. So I just enjoy, I got a little thing from Uber. I don't know if they send it to everybody. So I was one of the highest evaluated riders in Denver, which by the way, did you get one?
No, I'm not.
It's a cool thing, isn't it? Because it's kind of like a little reward. It's like, keep being a nice guy. Don't be a dumbass.
Yeah. My Uber rating is a 4.82 right now. Yours must be
a little higher.
4.9.
No, it'd be perfect except for one guy in Chicago who just sunk my boat because the guy couldn't find me, and I just got pissed off, and I finally said, "Look, I'll just walk," and I'm pretty sure that's where I got. Can they give you a minus? Like I may have got a -5 on that one.
So you travel a lot. This is really a big digression, but. And you sort of, I agree with you. Like you can find wisdom in unusual places if you look for it. Who do you think are like those who are the wise people that you come across in life and your travels and so on? I think of like barbers as being
bartenders for sure.
Bartenders.
Well, bartenders are worldly wise. Because they, in my opinion, and I'm sure some of them are just plain wise, but they have to be psychologists, and they have to be good listeners, and they have to have clever, repartee. Mm-hmm. Certainly barbers can be. I think that what I have come to realize, and I would have never admitted it when I was much younger, is you can only be so wise depending on your age. Mark Zuckerberg's smart. Mm-hmm. but he's only as wise as, what is Zuckerberg, 31 now?
Something
early
like that.
30s.
Yeah.
Even if he's the wisest 31-year-old guy on the planet, he still can only be 31-year-old wise. When I meet older people, and not all older people are wise just because of age. A lot of people paid no attention and they're just as rock dumb as they were when they started. But for the most part, thinking people that pay attention, the years increase your wisdom. And so older people, I have a mentor who's coming up on 80, and he's one of the smartest business people I've ever met. And he's always kind to just share stories with me. I mean, he teaches me things through his experiences, and he is truly wise. And I'm guessing if I'd have met him when he was 40, he'd have still been wise, but he wouldn't have been 80 years wise.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, I think there's a lot of older folks, because of the bias against their age, people overlook them as a source of.
It works both ways. I mean, we were all young once, and ageism can work. Ageism can work against us. When I started speaking full time, I was 27.
Okay.
And back then, in the Jurassic period, we used audio cassette tapes to get hired. There was no internet. We didn't have videotapes, right?
Okay.
So if someone was thinking about hiring you, you packaged up a little audio cassette, sent it to them. They listened to you. If they liked it, they hired you. And because I was only 27, I can remember one meeting planner for Montgomery Ward that just about passed out when I walked in because, she's thinking, well, there goes my career as a meeting planner. I just hired a kid.
Right.
So the good news is I worked really, really hard to have a good program. I was as wise as I could be at 27, but I knew I wasn't a 50-year-old guy who had a long career in business. So I just worked doubly, triply hard to make sure that my messaging was right. So I had to work hard to be taken seriously. But it's funny. You have to work hard to be taken seriously when you're young. And then when you're older, a lot of times we don't take old people seriously just because of the way they look. You don't look, sometimes I don't take myself seriously when I look in the mirror. And so we have to get good at saying, maybe we shouldn't judge the old cliche-ish book by its cover.
Yeah, I agree with that. So, in terms of getting good, let's talk about how you got good from this big E, little e standpoint. Let's use that as a framework. So, which did you start with? You started with the big E? You started with
I started with the little e because, again, I started speaking at a very young age. I was mostly given book reports, Zig Ziglar, Jim Rohn, Dennis Waitley. I was sharing the wisdom of others. And I was doing it well for my age. But I realized, and that's one of the reasons I went into business before I started speaking full time. Obviously, if I started speaking full time at 27, I didn't spend 2 decades, but I started selling in college and then had a brief sales and marketing career for the simple reason that I knew I needed to have something to talk about. I needed experience. One of the reasons that I started my own business and I served on association boards was I didn't want to talk about leadership in the abstract. I mean, until you run a board meeting, until you make a payroll as an entrepreneur, you're probably not going to have the depth of experience that'll make you an effective speaker on leadership. But, I learned how to speak, and then I started really focusing on what I spoke about. But the third evolution was, after I brought the two together, the expertise and the eloquence, was becoming more organically funny. To me, comedy is an objective. In my work as a speaker, comedy is icing on the cake. It's a byproduct. People don't hire me because I'm funny, but after they've heard me, they were really happy I was funny. And you and I have had this conversation. If I said I'm a funny speaker, that would be fatal because their expectation would be that I'd be a comic or at the very least a humorist. And they'd go, no, you're not that funny. But when they hire me and they've seen a little bit of humor in my video clips and my preview video, but what they've mostly seen is my ability to interact with the audience. And then when I have humor as part of that, the highest compliment I am paid, I think, or at least the one that I like the most, is when they say you're the funniest non-funny speaker we've had.
That's nice.
Because it's kind of like, that's a smaller universe, right? Than you're the funniest speaker in the world, right? Or, it's like saying you're the funniest guy on Rockport Lane, which is a cul-de-sac in Highlands Range. But, here's the other thing. I've always had a very bizarre, wicked, dry sense of humor that I got from my father. And so off stage, I've always been kind of darkly funny. I mean, I've got a dark sense of humor. And it's when I finally had enough confidence that I was going to get hired, that I, consistently, that I started to let that seep into my work with audiences. Because I think we're all afraid, early on, wow, if I say something wrong, that'll be the last speech I ever give. I'll be blackballed from the industry.
Mm-hmm. So when you're adding comedy to your talk, maybe that's not even the right way to say it. Like, what is the process? Like, do you work on your talk and then you're like, oh, I'm going to punch this up? Or do you find that the jokes sort of find their way in very early on?
Both. I think that sometimes there's funny inherent that you don't even know about. I've told stories, and when the audience laughed, I made a note and said, this must be funny. It wasn't necessarily that funny to me, but they laughed.
Okay.
It's kind of operant conditioning, right? Or, Pavlovian salivating dog. They laugh, as the bell ringing, I salivate, and I say another funny thing. The other part is you look for what you're already saying, and you say, what could be funny about that?
Uh-huh.
I had a guy who I'm really a big fan of. He's a humorous speaker, a very creative fellow named David Glickman. And David and I were on a program together, and I was doing my speech, and he sat in, and he gave me a page of a dozen ideas on how to make my speech funnier.
Oh, wow. What a gift.
Yeah, oh, no kidding. I mean, I was delighted. And I tried most of them. Some of them just didn't fit me. I mean, it wasn't that they weren't potentially funny, but there's a line he gave me that to this day kind of amazes me that people laugh, but they do. And I did it yesterday. I tell a story about getting really good service at a Mexican restaurant. And I say the wait person's name was Alicia. And it really was her name, Alicia. And so David says, so what you say is you say, and my wait person's name was Alicia, which is Spanish for Alicia. Honest to goodness, it gets a laugh every time. I think it's like one of those groaners.
It's a little hacky, but
it's hacky. But you know what? The proof is in the response.
That's right.
And we've all heard speakers and later gone, "Oh, that was so cheesy," but you still laughed.
Yeah.
And so there's that kind of intentional look at what you're saying. And the reason he saw that and I didn't is he's a humorist and I'm not. See, that's his craft.
Yeah.
What could be funny about that? I learned early on that, a lot of comics use kind of the power of three. If you have one funny line, try to land at least two more so you've got kind of a triad. Often when you're beginning a speech, I'll sometimes say, I'm from Denver, Colorado, where it's perfectly legal to get Rocky Mountain High.
Uh-huh.
Doesn't work very well in Denver because it's like, wah, wah, we know that. But if you really wanted to build that out, you say the other thing I like about Denver is, you can see a $5,000 mountain bike on top of a $300 car.
Uh-huh.
And the guys or gals that really craft that, they would want shorter punchlines, but they would say, if you can land three funny bits, that's the ultimate combo, rather than just the old, on the way to the speech, a funny thing happened, right? That's a joke. You want just three funny. Mm-hmm. And so I often think about that when I'm working on a story. I don't put the funny three in a row, but I'll say, if this is a pretty good sized story, I want a couple three, anywhere from a smile to a chuckle to a laugh.
I see. So I normally ask people what they're best at. Are you best at speaking?
Yeah, I think I'm better at speaking than writing. I think I've gotten a lot better at writing, mostly because I've done it now almost as long as I've been speaking. But when I began, the two are different mediums, and people erroneously think that if they're a good speaker, they should write a book, and there's a lot of proof that's a bad idea. Or as my friend Susan Royan says, everyone says they have a book inside of them, and for some, that's where it should stay.
Yes.
So I started speaking, but as I interned in college, both on the sales and marketing side of the publishing business, and I've always written, but I didn't get really serious about my writing until the Fred Factor. And I had a guy on Amazon, bad review, didn't like me for whatever reason, didn't like the book, and he said, this is written at a 7th grade level. And I thought, I wonder if it is. And so you can actually take text and go on the internet, plop it into this little free software, and it'll tell you.
Yes.
Well, I took a big piece of text, and Fred Factor is not written at a 7th grade level. It's written at a 5th grade level.
Oh, congratulations.
And I wanted to go back. And say, hey, idiot, that's not true. It's written at a 5th grade level. But the book sold 1 million copies here and another million abroad, and it's because of the story. The writing's just okay. I mean, it's not Hemingway-esque writing. Now, I've written...
I've read the book. The writing is solid.
All right. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you.
It's like, I get it.
But it's not eloquent. It's not like, you read some writers and they just are so lyrical. But I've gotten better as a writer. I haven't had a book as big as The Fred Factor because I haven't had a story as powerful as this.
Maybe you should tell the story for folks.
Well, if you don't tell the whole story, it kind of is like dissecting a frog. You learn about the frog, but the frog still dies. The bottom line is this postal carrier, a real life guy named Fred Shea, delivered my mail like an artist. I mean, the guy added so much value. We became friends. He was beloved by everybody on his street. He did things that took very little time, but that meant that created real value for his customers. And the whole premise of the book is nobody can prevent you from choosing to be extraordinary.
Yeah.
And I'm not speaking down on delivering the mail, but let's be honest. It's about putting mail in the box. It's about sorting mail at the substation and then putting mail in the box. So if a guy like Fred can make that artistry, then you and I have no excuse because we have a lot bigger canvas to paint on.
Right. Yeah. It's a lovely story. It's super compelling. So you're writing this. You felt compelled to write The Fred Factor, I have to imagine.
Oh, yeah. I got rejected for a decade, and I thought I was never going to write it. And then finally a publisher said, I want to do a book, and what do you have for ideas? And I pitched about 6 ideas, and he said, no. And then he goes, what about that Fred guy? And I'm like, holy buckets, for 10 years I've been turned away. People said, The Fred Factor doesn't say anything. Well, but the secret of The Fred Factor is the subtitle does. So The Fred Factor is like catchy.
Right.
The subtitle is instructive.
How passion in your work and life can turn the ordinary into the extraordinary.
Now, if I'd have just written a book called The Fred Factor, probably would have not done quite as well because people knew it was about work, passion, creativity. And so there was enough there to pick their interest.
Mm-hmm. So I want to ask you a few kind of more rapid fire questions. How do you spur creativity in your work? Do you have to work on your creative side?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's real easy to be a stenographer in life. But what I typically... First of all, I always quote Isaac Asimov, who wrote 500 plus books before he died. And they said, how are you so prolific? And he said, I think and think and think until I want to kill myself. And that sounds a little harsh, but what he was saying is he did the hard work of thinking. And he did it far deeper than most writers or authors, which is why most of us haven't written 500 books. But the other thing I do is I am really...
So the first thing is you think a lot.
Yeah, I try to think a lot. I don't, I can't lay claim to Isaac Asimov level thinking. I don't want to kill myself, I'll put it that way. But the second thing is I'm really eclectic. I think that, if you write business books, one of the worst things you can do is read a lot of business books.
Okay.
Mostly because you'll end up, and this happens in business, it happens in comedy. You emulate to learn, but you got to innovate to earn. Which is to say, you learn your craft underneath the master.
Mm-hmm.
That goes back hundreds of years when you're a blacksmith or you work for another blacksmith, and that's how you learned. And you could learn a basic skill or trade that way. But now, if you only emulate others, you'll never make any more than others make. I'll say, if you overtly quote Tom Peters or Jim Collins or Simon Sinek, they
might as well go read those guys.
Well, and it drives those guys' fees up because everybody's like, "Wow, that's really good. I got to go find the guy who actually said it, not the guy who repeated it." And so I'm very eclectic, and even the newspaper has fodder for creativity. I have a pretty big riff about adding value without spending much money to do it. And yesterday, in the USA Today, my favorite adult coloring book of newspapers, there was an article about all the technology things that Domino's is using to defeat Pizza Hut. And what's interesting to me, anybody could have read the article, anybody could have quoted from the article, but what's interesting to me, the aspect I glommed onto is we used to think that technology lent itself well to processes and operations and analytics. But when you got to food, you said, well, what are you going to do? Put a microchip in my burger?
Right.
No, but there's a pizza company in the Middle East that has a little magnet you put on your refrigerator that's programmed in your pizza order, and if you get hungry, you just literally push the button, and 12 to 15 minutes later, the pizza arrives. It's paid for. It's the pizza that you prefer.
Yeah.
So we are putting technology into food. And when I looked at that kind of hit list of all the things that Domino's is doing, they have tracking devices now, not in your pizza, but on the box. So they know. You call and you go, hey, it's already the third quarter, and I ordered my pizza at halftime. They'll go, well, right now it's crossing, Third and Pine. It'll be there shortly. So technology literally, if it isn't driving something, I would say it's riding. It's either a driver or a rider, because I can't think of anything that isn't impacted by technology. So if I only read, MIT's review or Harvard Business Review, and not this lowly daily newspaper you get for free in your hotel room, I would have missed a wonderful potential illustration.
Right. Yeah. Speaking of barbers, and that I was having a conversation with mine, and I was like, why do I have to check out? Like, why can't I just walk in, get my hair cut, and then shake your hand and walk out? And then my credit card just gets debited with the fee and the tip.
Yeah.
And everything.
Because it's always the same.
It's always the same. I'm a repeat customer, but it's just these old legacy things that there used to be a cash register there. And so we're just still using that same thing. Like, what if you could easily move to that maybe you couldn't easily move to that model, but if you did, like, why would I? Well, I would love it.
You could move to a select group of higher end users, because I would be the same way. My biggest happiness was when the airlines allowed you to check in online.
Yes.
Because it never made sense to me that you made a reservation and filled out all the form. Then you went to the airport and you stood in front of a man or woman who then literally looked like they were filling out the form again, or at least confirming you hadn't lied about what was in the form. And when they first went to before it was online, you just went to the kiosk, and that kind of made me mad, because I'm like, I got to do the work. And it's like, well, it's not really hard work. Any third grader could figure it out. And then when it went to online, my goal is I prefer not to interact with anybody except maybe the flight attendant to order my beverage. And not because I don't like people, but because it's unnecessary. In my audiences, I say, how many of you have ordered from Amazon? Which is a rhetorical question. Everybody's ordered from Amazon. And I say, how many of you have actually spoke to a person at Amazon? And it varies between 5 and 10%. It's gone up a bit.
Okay.
But a few years ago, it was like,
yeah, it's all email.
Single digits.
Yeah.
You can return stuff, you can get a refund, and you never talk to anybody. I love that. It's what we call frictionless business. Now, if you're a comedian or a comic, there's some really good material for dating and relationships in there too, right? What would happen if we didn't have to interact with our spouses, which, by the way, some people do, and that doesn't end well. But to me, there's a lot of funny things that just kind of bubble to the surface if you're just open to it.
Yeah, and you're paying attention.
Paying attention, yeah. Open and paying attention.
Yeah. Do you have an unpopular opinion?
Well, I have a lot of them, and most of them I don't share because
they're unpopular.
No, not because they're unpopular, but because I think we've lost the ability to think in dialogue civilly.
Okay.
I just don't invite crap into my life if I can help it.
Okay.
I'll give you an example. In my speaking, I had a mentor who passed away some years ago, and he was one of the first guys in the business, and he has some classic lines that are quite funny. And he probably didn't even originate them all, but he basically said to me, "Hey, Mark, go ahead and use them. I'm out." Yeah.
Okay.
And one of the lines is, when I do this thing, if I get anywhere near politics, I'll say, as somebody that studies words, politics comes from two root words, poly meaning many and ticks meaning bloodsuckers. And he gets a laugh, because pretty much everybody, and that was a line that he used 50 years ago.
Okay.
So then I said, and of course I can say that because I'm not a member of any organized political party. Pause. Okay. I'm a Republican.
Okay.
By the way, that line can be used if you're a Democrat,
yes,
a Republican, a liberal, a conservative, a Buddhist. It doesn't matter, right?
Yes.
I was getting these vitriolic remarks, and here's what they'd say. That some clients will ask for your evaluation of the speaker. Can't believe he preached his politics. To which I want to go, hey, dumbass, I made fun of my party.
Right.
And I'm not even that much of a staunch anymore. I don't even know what a Republican is. I mean, in the current age we live in, it's a pretty bad label. But what got me was, and here's what I sometimes say. I say, some of you woke up this morning looking to be pissed off. So as a value add, I'm going to make it easy for you.
Okay.
Because that kind of breaks the ice and says, look, if you're really going to be jerky about it, you're probably going to be offended by something I say. But my agent said, she said, would you please quit using that Republican line? I said, well, yeah, I will. Mostly because there was no upside. I got a laugh, but, these are corporate audiences.
Yeah, you want to be uniting the group and not dividing them.
Yeah, one of the weirder things that ever happened to me is I do a quiz and I tell people don't say anything, don't talk out loud, don't ask questions. And I used to say no matter how many times I say that, there's always someone that has a Tourette's-like outburst. And it gets a laugh. And I had this woman in my audience sent me this 2-page letter, and she was really upset because her son had Tourette's, and I had no idea the pain that caused him, and that, you should never use a terrible disease to get a laugh. And I responded, and she did not respond back, which was a little disappointing because I was trying to be sensitive. I mean, you have kids, that's hurtful when somebody says something that touches on that hurt. But I said to her, it's funny, I'm a cancer survivor, and I hear the word cancer every day in non-medical terms.
Right.
Man, that meeting that process is a cancer to society. That law is a cancer to society. So we do use words like that. And I've never thought about being upset that somebody said, that's like a cancer on my soul. Cancer means a bad thing, a malignant thing. Just like Tourette's can mean a disease. Well, notice I don't say somebody has Tourette's. I say has a Tourette's-like outburst. And people laugh, not at Tourette's, they laugh because we all know those people that kind of just spout off, just kind of come out of left field. So you have to eventually say, where am I willing to draw the line, and am I willing to completely lose my identity and my style? The worst thing you can do is try to make everybody happy. A, it's impossible. B, it's a losing proposition. And C, it'll make you miserable.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, I'm certainly one who, I try to kind of have a do no harm kind of approach to my teaching and speaking and things like that. But it's weirdly balanced by this idea that you can't make everyone happy. Right, so there's this sort of wanting everyone to be happy and then also not wanting to be harmful. And sometimes those things come into conflict. In my world, it's cold calling. I cold call students. Boy, some of them really appreciate it and revel in it and enjoy it. And then many, they find it very difficult. They find it off-putting and threatening. And then I'm now making them look bad. And then, and so on. And so to me, but I don't see, it's hard for me to see that as harmful because the goal of cold calling, one is to mirror what happens in the real world, which happens. Yeah. And the second one is to provide an incentive to be prepared.
And pay attention.
And be involved.
Exactly. Yeah.
I had a conversation with a comedian who said he was having a conversation with other very famous, prominent comedians, and their take was, never has there been, in their lives, a feeling of such a big disconnect between public and private discourse. That is that the things that you would be willing to say, these unpopular opinions, let's say, for instance, with your mates, with your friends, that you wouldn't say them publicly because of the nature of
the backlash,
the conversation and the amplification and so on. I think that's interesting. I talk about this whenever I get interviewed about like censorship and comedy and so on. And are there topics that you can't tell jokes about and so on? And I always sort of say that like I'm always offer a cautionary tale or a cautionary comment, which is, well, the nice thing about everything being you're able to make jokes about it is that at least you can have a conversation about it. Like you're no longer like driving it underground.
Yeah.
And I think that being able to have those kind of conversations is useful. So, for instance, even just yours as a private correspondence responding to that woman, now you're having a conversation at least.
Which is always my goal. And it brings us back to the original question. Do I have unpopular opinions? Yes, I do. And I miss the ability to have my thinking challenged in a respectful way, or to challenge others' thinking in a respectful way. I'm a kind of a left brain guy, so I see a lot of stuff, and I don't post anything political on my Facebook page. Again, there's no upside. But sometimes I'll just see something that's just bogus. I mean, it's not even fake news. It's totally fabricated, and I'll have the facts to back it up. And what I learned is we've crossed over the Rubicon where feelings trump facts.
Okay.
No pun intended. But which is to say that how you feel about the facts makes the facts right or wrong.
Uh-huh.
If I don't like the fact that more people are killed by drunk drivers than by guns or by opioids,
Okay.
I mean, I'm just using that as an illustration, then I go, oh, you're an animal, because the killing by guns is far worse. Well, yeah, but I guess if you're killed, whether it's by an opioid or a drunk driver or a gun, you're still dead, right?
Or cancer.
Or cancer, right, yes. Or an audience member who doesn't like your choice of words. Yeah, and it's like, it's just no fun anymore, you got to keep, but here's what's funny. I was around when Andrew Dice Clay made his debut.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
And he made his debut by being as we now say, as politically incorrect and as rude as possible.
Uh-huh.
Then things got kinder and gentler. We found out that, maybe he wasn't a complete asshole in real life. Maybe he was just a guy doing an act.
Yeah, it was an act.
And then Louis C.K. started talking about stuff. And what that says to me is that obviously people feel that stuff, or they wouldn't go to laugh at it in the comedy club. I'm not going to say it's right, wrong. That's not my point.
But it touches
the point
something.
Is, it's touching what a whole bunch of people crammed into a room drinking overpriced drinks want to hear.
Yeah.
Louis C.K., if he just started talking about, how he felt about his kids, everybody talks about their kids lovingly, not, there's times I like to sell them to gypsies. He starts talking about it. There must be a lot of people frustrated, right? Because they think it's funny.
Yeah, that's right. So you strike me as someone who's got a motor, that you have a lot of energy, you're highly motivated. Do you ever suffer from like a lack of inspiration or a lack of motivation?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think if you don't take care of yourself physiologically, no matter how motivated you are psychologically, you're headed for trouble. And I'm working with executive leaders. I see that a lot. You just see the toll, the physical toll that travel and meetings and stress take on people. I kind of grew up in a negative environment. I've struggled on and off my entire life, which I just share so that as a public service, not to get sympathy with clinical depression.
Okay.
Because when people go, wow, you're a speaker and you're funny and you have a lot of energy, I say, it didn't come naturally. I wasn't a member of the Lucky Sperm Club. I wasn't born with this chipper attitude and this rosy outlook. And the reason,
so you've had to work at it.
And I share that with people just for the simple reason, as corny as it sounds, to give them hope. Because I think there are some people that just go, that could never be me. I'm just not that way. Well, learn behaviors. I'm an introvert by nature, but I'm a situational extrovert. I could have said, well, I'll never make it in sales or speaking or management or leadership, because at the end of the day, I'd prefer to be by myself or with a small group of friends. That's true.
Okay.
But I could learn to be an extrovert. I could learn to interact. I could learn to get energy from people. So I always tell people, don't think that there's any genetic predisposition or circumstance that has slammed your door on optimism or humor or whatever it is that you want to do.
So how'd you learn to be situationally extroverted?
I just watched successful people and I said, wow, that's funny. Look at what they did. And I did it.
I see. So you just started behaving like an extrovert.
Yeah, I had a lot of self-confidence issues when I was younger. I mean, people are going, oh, Lord, we're getting into catharsis. I was an overweight kid with no athletic ability who did well in school, which I call a trifecta for getting beat up.
Okay.
I mean, I was, I was a nerd before we had the word nerd, right? Because I had no hand-eye coordination. I wasn't the last to get picked for a team. They'd argue over who had to take me.
Okay.
I mean, and I'm over it. I mean, I'm not saying this with some kind of weepy sadness in my soul, but I basically used that to say, screw this, man. I'm going to go on to figure out how to kick ass and take names. I don't mean physically, but to excel in business or to do well in school. I got past that idea of, my first 10-year reunion when I went back and the jock quarterback was like 3 times his body weight in high school. I said, see, there's justice in the universe.
So you're a fit guy. What you work out?
I wasn't always, but same thing. I was an unfit guy until I realized that if I wanted to be a fit guy, I was going to have to do some different stuff.
Right. Yeah. So when you, and if this is too much, please, we can pass. But so when you find yourself in kind of a depressive episode, do you do these same things to try to get out of it? How does that work?
Well, I'll tell you, and it's simple. I just do what needs to be done. That's my mantra. I called my wife once and I was so down. I mean, I was just really in the dumps. I was just had no energy, didn't want to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're really, if no one's, we're all situationally depressed, but if you've never dealt with depression, it's hard to explain, but your life force is gone. Nothing, you could be in the middle of a candy store and it would mean nothing to you, even if you liked candy. But one day I called Darla and I said, I'm just depressed. And she goes, well, why don't you come home? I said, no, because I got stuff to do.
Mm-hmm.
I guess maybe I learned that from the work ethic of my parents, but I never let how I felt prevent me from doing what I needed to do. Now, was I as inspired? Did I bring as much energy and joy? Of course not. I didn't have any energy or joy to bring to it, but I got it done. And that to me is discipline. Discipline is the ability to do what needs to be done, even when you don't feel like doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Discipline is not doing what needs to be done. Most of the time, you feel like doing it.
Right.
Discipline's when people go, you must really like to work out. Not really. I mean, I could free up an hour a day to drink beer, bourbon, and read, which would be 3 things that would maybe all at the same time make me happy. But I work out, and here's the funny thing. I feel good after I work out.
Yes.
I don't always feel good when I go, I got to drag my butt into the gym. But at the end, I'm like, I am glad I worked out.
Yes. I feel that way all the time. So, what are you working on these days?
Well, a new book. I've been in the business of speaking for 32 years. I'm not the flavor of the day. I'm not the new next best thing. I went through that phase, was grateful for it, but I realized that if it's the same in comedy, if you're going to be in demand, eventually your old material is going to lose its luster, and you've always got to be creating. So, the good news is I like to write new books about new things because it forces me to learn new things. And I'm going to write a book about the importance of clarity in business and how that affects leadership. And I'm going to write on some topics that are pretty original to me, if not completely original to me, and that 3-4 years ago, the world wasn't ready for them. The role of emotion in business and things like that. And I continue to speak, and I love to speak. That's the most fun I have. That's why I put up with the airplane rides in the hotel room.
And that pays the bills.
Yeah, well, that too. And I have one son in college and another about to start.
Okay. So you're sort of, how much do you feel like you're recreating yourself? Like you're good, right? So it's not a matter of getting better with your presentation skills and these kinds of things, your sales and marketing, your branding, all this stuff, but like you're finding a new message that someone goes, oh, we should bring Mark back. Or
that and also, if you think of a puzzle, to create a metaphor, 20 years ago in business, maybe there were 15 or 20 pieces in the puzzle. They were big pieces, right? You had your sales and marketing, your operations, your engineering, your production, your customer service. Well, now when you look at all of the nuances, we got these really complex puzzles. Speaking's the same way. Before this call today, I was on the phone with a friend of mine who's an expert in website analysis. And we have 80 videos on my website, but we didn't uncheck a box. a default box that YouTube uses to basically interject your competitors' ads.
Oh my goodness.
At the end of your video. So, here I am feeling pretty good about having 80 videos posted. And if you watch to the end or pause, you see a half dozen of my competitors who've used my name. So they show up.
Really?
And so that, the old saying, it sounds stupid. You don't know what you don't know. Well, now that I know what I didn't know, first thing I did is I, sent an email to my webmaster and said, we have to fix this. So there's no aspect of my business that I don't have to tweak.
Yeah.
You think, well, I get a good website, I'm good for a few years. I get a good preview video, I get a good digital brochure. You got to be tweaking that stuff because somebody's waking up this morning with a new overlay or a new nuance or a new technique or a new technology. And if you're sitting on your hands, you better be retiring in the next 12 to 24 months.
Yeah, I have a saying that I use all the time with my MBAs, and it's business is hard, business is hard, business is hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
And every class I find myself saying it at some point, because otherwise, if you think it's easy, you're in trouble.
And you know what's funny? Peter, is I tell my audiences, you don't like it when it's easy. You enjoy it when it's easy. You like it when it's hard. Yeah. It took me a long time to figure that out. We confuse enjoyment with where we get our pride and satisfaction. You may have a great day and everything goes smoothly, but man, if you solved a big, hairy problem or you landed a big account that you've been working on for 9 months, that's where you really get your gratification from. Jordan Peterson said the same thing about life. Right now everybody either loves or hates Jordan Peterson, the professor out of Canada. And he said, being a good person is really hard work. And I think that we got away from that. We thought that, as long as you didn't kill someone, hit them with your car, abuse them, use them, you're a good person. But that's kind of like, that just means you're not a bad person.
Yeah, that's just
that doesn't mean
removing
you're
the harm.
A good
Yeah,
person.
that's
It
right.
just means you're not a bad person. And I think you're right. And we've created this, inadvertently, we've created this sense that life should be easy, business should be easy, being a good person should be easy. And when people aren't putting in the effort, it's biting them in the ass, and they're going, how come I'm not successful in business? How come I'm not considered a good person? You didn't do the work.
I mean, I don't call it wisdom. I don't know what I would call it, but my recognition is almost anything that is good, that you want, comes with some price. That is, whenever there's an upside, there's a potential downside. For me, it's almost a law, right? Like, if I want to feel good, I need to do the hard work in the gym.
Yeah, you're not going to look like a buff guy if you're eating donuts on your couch.
Yeah, that's right. And so whatever that thing is just, is just recognizing that there's going to be some unpleasantness, some challenge. And then the key is, this is the thing I think that people don't often realize is what you're saying is that challenges in of themselves can start to be something that you can take pleasure in, enjoy. The
pride, gratification,
exactly,
pleasure. Well, I mean, I'll go back to what I said earlier. I did not like my first public speaking contest. Mm-hmm. I was mortified. But it set me on a course that's allowed me to have a really fun life and speak all over the world and make a boatload of money. So if I had to choose between liking that first speech and being propelled forward by being challenged by it, I'd still take the challenged. That's I always say take the path of some resistance. I spent most of my life trying to find the path of least resistance, but you don't build mental or physical muscle without resistance. And that's why it worries me. I mean, I don't want to sound like a curmudgeonly old guy, but I'm sure I will when I say this. The whole idea of safe spaces, your ideas threaten me. The only way you can build mental chops is when you meet the resistance of an opposing idea. Now, I'm not talking about being hateful or abusive, but I mean, anymore, an idea that someone disagrees with me on, they label as hurtful. No, it's different. It's not hateful or hurtful if it's just an opposing opinion.
Yeah.
And so how are you going to have any intellectual muscle if you just always look for safe zones and no resistance? And so I'll say, take the path of some resistance, you'll develop strength.
Yeah, I think that, in the world of academia, that's the norm. You have to have opposition in order to publish your ideas. And it's actually the opposition that makes those ideas better. It's the anticipation of that opposition that makes you work harder on the ideas. And the people I feel who are the most successful invite opposition early on in the process, and don't try to find a way around it. And because, I think it's a lot like lifting weights and the effect that it has on your like skeleton. You know, like you have to actually stress your skeleton.
Right. And it's cumulative too.
Yeah.
And so the more resistance you deal with over time, even though it's not always pleasant, the stronger you become and more prepared to deal with the future resistance.
Exactly. Yeah. It's, it doesn't always feel good though. That's the point, right? Like when I get critiques, it still doesn't feel good, although I've learned to welcome it in the same way that I've welcomed being out of breath on a run or something like that. All right. 2 last questions. So you mentioned that you read very broadly. What are you reading, watching, or listening to that really stands out to you that you just go, wow, that's amazing?
I read Cal Newport's book, Deep Work, and part of the reason I liked it is because I was already kind of philosophically on the same page, and actually, even before I read his work, talked about some of the things he talked about, but I thought he unpacked it in a way that was masterful. And that's really affected me in terms of getting rid of the... I've always said, don't ever confuse activity with accomplishment. And what he then said is, here's how you can accomplish something significant and go beyond flittering along the surface. In terms of, I read a lot of fiction, but I take a long time. I love Michael Connelly. I like to read fiction. You learn something. Connelly, if you like police procedurals, he rarely writes a bad book. Some of his books are better than others. I like Joe Nesbo, the European author who writes the crime noir. But I sometimes read what, Celeste, and I can't pronounce her last name, NG.
Okay.
She writes about stories set in Shaker Heights, Ohio, not far from where I grew up. Amazing stories. Little Fires Everywhere. I love that book. And, the problem with finding really good books is I'm not the guy that picks up. I would be hard pressed. I'd be desperate to go into a store in an airport and just pick up a James Patterson. James Patterson does well, but that's not the kind of books I like to read. Mm-hmm. So I spend as much time researching what I read as I do reading.
How do you figure out what books to
read? A lot of reviews, talk to a lot of friends. I hang out in bookstores just kind of anymore. Barnes & Nobles is on this jag to stay in business. Now
I hope they do.
I do too, but they sick people on you. You can't look anymore. It's like, can I help you? No, I'm just looking. What are you looking for? I'm looking for a book. What kind of books do you like to read? I like to read books with words in them. Let me recommend a few books with words. It's like, you got to find that balance between selling and just letting people find. That to me is the joy. I can't do that on Amazon. I can look at the reviews, but I can't, for the most part, thumb through the pages. And I've bought books on Amazon that look great online and sucked in real life, and vice versa.
Yeah, I do, as someone who's written a book and, says he'll never write another. I still like going to bookstores and just flipping through it and seeing what else is there.
Yeah.
I used to do this thing, you don't, on college campuses, I don't have to do this anymore. You don't have to go to the library to get your books. They'll deliver them to you. At least as a faculty member, it's a nice perk of the job. But, especially when I was an assistant professor and when I was a graduate student, I'd go pick up a book. And then I made it a habit that I would look at all the other books on that shelf, on that one particular shelf. Because usually they're of similar topics.
Yeah.
And invariably, I'd find 1, 2, 3 other books that were of interest that I didn't know about. And stumbling on those things was
well, and Amazon's done a good job of writing code so that you can still see what are other people reading that bought that book. But the best books, some of the best books I've ever found were I stumbled on them. Yeah. I just looked on a table, maybe it was, women's studies, and somebody had dropped a book that they had taken out of history, and you go, oh, cool. I had no idea.
Yeah. I'm really working hard to find time to do even more reading. All right, last question. The secret to success, everyone knows, but can't seem to do.
Wow, that's. I mean, I don't want to be flip. I think that everybody now. I believe. I'll go back to some little tidbit of research from my last book, The Potential Principle.
Okay.
We found that 58% of the people we interviewed had a commitment to getting better, but only 30% had a plan. And
Okay.
so I've come to believe, and I've always believed this, that a commitment without a plan is wishful thinking.
Okay.
We all know what we want. Fewer of us know what we need to do, and even fewer do it.
Okay.
I guess I'd also quote a beer founder, Lagunitas, Tony McGee, the guy that founded Lagunitas. In his autobiography, he said, "You are what you did." And that's a great statement, but what I find comforting is that you become what you do.
Okay.
So who we are today is what we did. But you want to change who you are tomorrow? Do something different.
Yeah, so this is connected to when we were talking about your situational extroversion, right? You're a big behavior guy. You're like, you're like, okay, well, if you want this thing to happen, you have to start doing all the steps. You have to start behaving in the way that's going to get you to that place.
Yep.
That's nice. Mark, thanks so much for doing this.
Oh, it was great fun. Thank you.
That's great.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to visit petermcgraw.org for more information about our guest, show notes, and social media links. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share with others. Join Dr. Peter McGraw next week.